Hey folks, Matt Easton here, Scholar Gladiatoris. So this is part 2 of the video of taking this antique rusty sword and cleaning it up a bit and then resharpening it. It's already service sharpened so that I can use it for test cutting in a non-destructive and relatively light way. So water bottles, things like this, things that are not going to damage it. I've spoken in my previous video, linked below, about the kind of ethics and the things to watch out for when using an antique in any kind of way, really, for anything. I'll just reiterate a couple of points in that because I think they really need highlighting. If you do have an antique sword and you are considering using it for cutting water bottles, or even for, I know a lot of people use them, in HEMA anyway, use them for solo training, that is, taking an antique saber and, you know, practicing movements with it and all this kind of stuff, you're not gonna damage the sword so long as you pick the right sword and use it in a respectful way. So the first thing is that the blade has to be of relatively decent quality, so it has to have some flex to it and not to have lost its temper. I have to say I have had over the years some antique swords where if you did that to them, they'd actually stay slightly bent. Now, in some cases that's because their original manufacture quality wasn't fantastic. It happened, unfortunately, in the 19th century, and that's one of the reasons that companies like Wilkinson and Pillin and Thurkel, good quality mold, good quality makers, had the reputation that they did because they tested their blades and they used good quality steel, good heat treatment, and so on and so forth. Not all swords were good quality, some were crap, quite fundamentally. So you want to get a sword that's reasonably decent quality to begin with, if you can tell what the maker is, if it's a decent maker, but also check that it's still got the flex in the blade. Some blades, not in recent years, but in subsequent years, have been polished or in some cases even unheat treated so that they can be straightened for aesthetic reasons. So if someone's got a sword that's nice but it's bent and they can't straighten it, they sometimes remove that. It has happened, they remove the heat treatment so that they can straighten the blade and then sell it to someone as a nice straight sword. But of course it's no longer a functional sword. Well, you could use it as a sword, but it's no longer got the spring that you desire from at least this type of sword blade. The other thing to watch out for, two things really mainly, are number one, that the hilt is solid on the tang. If there's any kind of movement, first of all, it's not going to be very pleasant to cut with, because whenever you hit even a water bottle with it, this is going to all move around and clunk, and you're actually going to lose some of the energy of the sword, which should be transferred straight to the edge and through the target. Some of the energy is going to be lost to wiggling around on the tang, so you don't want that. But secondly, it's more likely to get progressively worse if you do use the sword, even just for swinging around on the air. If it's got movement, it might get worse. Although I have to say, I've known a lot of swords which have a little bit of movement in the guard, and swinging around in air and solo training doesn't seem to harm them at all. And the final one is the grip. Okay, if the grip is at all fragile, either the wood or the shark skin or the wire, of course, handling it regularly and moving it around is going to put extra stress and strain and wear on that grip. If a grip's already really worn, obviously you don't necessarily have to worry about that. If the shagrins or if the shark skin's all fallen off, or the wires all come off, in a way that makes it more appropriate for handling and using, because you're not going to make it any worse. Or indeed, if it's just in pretty good condition and everything's solid and tight, then you're unlikely to do any damage to it. And lastly, all swords should be treated with respect. They are weapons, but whilst they're collector's items and display pieces as well, especially if something's sharp, it is of course a weapon. So obviously basic safety, being careful who's around you, where you're using it, how you're using it, respecting yourself and those around you, but respecting the sword as well. And obviously there are certain things that if you hit with the sword, doesn't matter how good the sword quality is, it will damage the sword. And there are other things which are never going to damage the sword. I personally have never seen a European style sword damaged cutting, for example, tatami mats. Tatami mats are very soft target and very sympathetic to steel blades. I have seen Japanese style blades actually bend on tatami, but that's the nature of Japanese swords. If you bend a Japanese sword, it will stay bent. At least if it's made traditionally. Maybe not if it's modern, like Paul Chen or something, but if it's a traditionally made, layered, forged, and differentially edge hardened, and only edge hardened Japanese blade, then you bend it and it'll stay bent, whereas a European sword is a spring. So generally speaking, I've never seen personally, I'm sure it's happened, but I've never personally seen a European style sword, medieval or Victorian or any other period, damaged on tatami mats. Water bottles, can be slightly abrasive. They can scratch the surface of a blade. I've seen Albions and other modern made swords, for example, pick up scratches from certain types of plastic, from water bottles, and cardboard tubes are incredibly severe on blades. People don't necessarily realise, but cardboard isn't just made of pulped up wood, paper. It's actually got kind of grit and other things in there that are quite hard, and the glue that holds it all together. So cardboard tubes are very, I would almost class those in abusive tests. So I would absolutely not recommend you to use anything that you don't want damage to on cardboard, but plastic bottles, pretty much fine. I mean, at the end of the day, I picked this sword for this reason. It's got a slightly rusty surface, or a rusty surface, and it's lost its original polish. So I'm going to be polishing this blade, or cleaning this blade up to some degree anyway. So if it picks up any extra scuffs and stuff in using it, well, I'll just polish it again, because that's what I'm doing in the first place. At the moment, it's a rusty surface, so there's nothing to lose. Right, so let's move on to the first stage of cleaning. So first up, and this, I have to say, to turn this into a functional sword, all I'd have to do is resharpen the edge and boom, it's ready to go. However, I want to make it look a little bit nicer if I can, and I don't know what the results of this are going to be. It might end up still a very dull blade anyway, and I'll still go on and sharpen it, and I'll still use it and show it being cut with. But what I'm going to use is some rust remover. This is Hammerite Rust Remover Gel. Now, I have not used this one before. What I've previously used are liquids that come in a bottle, essentially. And what I have done is I got a piece of downpipe, so plastic pipe from the hardware store. I plugged one end, sealed one end, and then filled it up with the liquid, a bit like a quenching tube actually, for when you're if you watch Forged in Fire, for quenching blades. And then basically I've suspended the whole blade in that liquid overnight, 24 hours pretty much, and to remove rust, and it worked really, really well. But I've never tried this gel stuff before, so I bought it from, for those of you in the UK, I bought it from Halfords. So you can buy it in Halfords, and it's Hammerite, so it's a mainstream make, easy to find. You could get it obviously on Amazon or something like that. Product placement there. Yeah, so we're going to see how this works. As I understand it, the way that this, what it does is it says use a wire brush to remove loose rust, but there is no loose rust on this. Then, this is for cars incidentally, and then brush Hammerite Rust Remover Gel liberally on the blade in this case, obviously normally on a car. Work the gel into the surface, giving a coating of 1.5 millimeters. Wow, that's an extremely precise thickness of coating for a gel. But anyway, smear it all over and leave it for 15 to 20 minutes. Repeat the process, applying additional gel as necessary at 30-minute intervals for a period of 2 to 3 hours, or until the rust is removed, so for the rest of your life. So anyway, we're going to see how it works. I'm going to use a little nylon brush I've got and sort of agitate the surface, I guess. I think part of how this works, this gel, is kind of getting into the surface of the steel as much as possible and trying to get under that rust and separate the rust from the steel. Should point out that this says, it claims to bring back to bare metal. We will see, and it will not damage paintwork. Well, this isn't painted, obviously it's for cars, so the idea is you can smear it all over a rusted area on a car. It will remove the rust but not the paint, so that you can then prime and paint over the area where the rust has been removed. Maybe I'll move into classic car restoration at some point. I love classic cars, but I don't have the dedication to restore one. So, right, let's have a look and have a little go at doing this. I don't know how well it works. It may do nothing. Incidentally, if it does nothing, we have fallbacks for this, and I'm going to use the old-fashioned mechanical way of cleaning rust off a blade, that being oil and wire wool. I'm trying to bypass that because that is a pain in the butt, and I'm not the biggest fan of wire wool, as anybody who's watched my previous videos will know, because it's just horrible stuff. It makes a mess and it gets metal splinters in your fingers and all this kind of stuff. But anyway, let's have a go with this first and see what happens. Obviously I'm going to have to do it in several little sessions, so I'll just show bits of those. Well, I wasn't expecting that. This stuff looks like ectoplasm straight out of Ghostbusters. It's bright green stuff. I would imagine it's probably advisable to not get this on your skin, so I'm going to stick some leather gloves on and then get smearing it on the blade and agitating with a little brush.
This is what is not good. Okay, now, Mummy, get up.
No, I can do things.
What?
What do you do?
Yeah.
Where are you going? Oh, right. Feeling particularly fast today?
Yeah. It looks green.
It's goopy, isn't it?
It looks green, the sword does.
Does it look like bogies?
Yeah.
That's like if a giant sneezed into a pot.
And you're using the boat, and it looks like snot. But it's not all green. It's not even green, is it?
The goop is green.
Yeah.
So here you can see I've just used a piece of plastic tube, piece of drainage pipe, and putting the blade inside it there, so I can now hold it and put some goop on the hilt. So there we go, I've completely coated all the metal parts of the hilt. I've made sure that I wiped it off the shagreen or shark skin, because obviously I have no idea what this goop does to shark skin, and I shouldn't think that Hammerite have a clue either. And I've left it in a tube, and I'm now going to leave this for a bit as directed and see what happens. I imagine I don't think it specifies on the pot, but I imagine I'm going to have to kind of rub this goop off with a wire brush or a cloth or something like that. Okay, so here we've got the thing. It's been left for a bit with the goop on it, and it's horrible. So let's have a look and see. I've got a sacrificial cloth here to wipe this goop off. Let's see what's happening underneath this. Right, this is pretty gunky, horrible stuff. Wiping it all off. Let's get rid of that tube. It's really sticky stuff. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to put WD-40 on this to wash off the gunk that's on there. Let's get some WD-40 on this. So the rust remover has not worked quite as well as I'd hoped, but I'm also not particularly surprised. I've had mixed experiences with rust remover. However, what it has definitely done is loosened up the rust. There's different types of rust. You get different types of swords, or different objects in general, not just swords of course. And this one had a kind of crust, a biscuity like crust of rust, which can be one of the most labour intensive to mechanically remove, and of course you stand no chance of preserving any etching that's underneath that type of rust. This one, I just show what it currently looks like, just touch there we go. You can hopefully see that the blade is still very dark, but it has loosened up the rust, but it's also formed a kind of, the goop kind of dried into a syrupy like crust on top of that, so you've got to remove that to get to the surface of the metal underneath. what I've found that I need to do now is basically I need to go at it with wire wool. Okay, so that's the abrasive, it's a relatively mild, but it's the abrasive form of cleaning that I'd hoped to avoid. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe and feel free to follow us on Facebook.